The badge went down on the counter like it weighed more than it did. 47 years of service. 2 commendations. 1 Medal of Valor that the city gave him in a ceremony with cameras and a podium, and a mayor who shook his hand and said things like legacy and pride of this city. That was 11 years ago. Now the badge sat on a glass counter in a pawn shop on Decatur Street between a cracked guitar and a row of watches that nobody wanted, and the man behind the counter was squinting at it like it was a piece of junk he hadn't decided on yet. The man who put it there was named Aubrey Callum, 61 years old. Retired MPD, Memphis Police Department, 23 years on the force, the last 9 as a detective in homicide. He had solved more cases than any detective in his precinct's history. He had done it quietly, without much drama, without the kind of self-promotion that gets a man's name in the paper. He was methodical, patient, the kind of man who read a crime scene the way other men read a book, slowly, looking for what the author was trying to hide. He had been the best in that building. Paid less than 3 men he had trained himself. He never said anything about it. He was not that kind of man. The pawn shop owner, a thin, pale fellow Greer who wore a short-sleeved dress shirt like it was still 1987, turned the badge over once and set it down. "I can do 35. Aubrey Callum did not flinch. He had known it would be something like that. Still, something moved behind his eyes, not anger, not exactly. More like the particular kind of fatigue that settles in when you've had the same disappointment so many times it no longer surprises you. It just shows up. You recognize it like an old neighbor you stopped liking years ago. It's authentic, Callum said. MPD, 1978 issue. There are collectors. I know what it is, Greer said. I'm telling you what I can move it for, 35. The door chimed behind him. Callum didn't turn around. He was still looking at the badge. $35. He needed 412 by Friday. That was what the pharmacy had told him. The new medication, the one the neurologist had switched him to after the first one stopped working, was not covered under his current plan. $412 for a 30-day supply. He had 87 in his checking account. He had already called his insurance company twice. He had sat on hold for a combined total of 3 hours and 19 minutes, and both times he had been told, in very pleasant voices, that there was nothing they could do. He had one thing left to sell that was worth anything: the badge. He hadn't brought the Medal of Valor. He had left it in the box on the shelf in his bedroom. He told himself it was because nobody would want it, that it wasn't the kind of thing with a real market. But that wasn't true, and he knew it. He had left it there because he couldn't make himself pick it up. He had held the badge in his hand for a long time this morning before he put it in his jacket pocket. The medal he hadn't been able to touch. There is a line a man draws for himself, even when everything else is gone. He finds it in strange places. "Can you do 40? Callum asked. Greer made a face like he was doing him a favor. "Let me look again." That's when the voice came from somewhere to Callum's left. "Hold on." He was younger than Callum by maybe 20 years. Dark skin, broad through the shoulders, wearing a work jacket with the name of a heating and cooling company stitched above the chest pocket. Meridian HVAC, Memphis, TN. He was holding a paper bag from a drugstore, and he was looking at the badge on the counter with an expression that was hard to read. Not pity. Something more careful than that. His name was Donavon Marsh, 38 years old. He had grown up in Orange Mound, gone to Whitehaven High, worked HVAC for 16 years, the last 4 as a crew lead for Meridian. He was good at his job in the way that men who came up hard tend to be good at things, with his whole body, not just his hands. He could walk into a building and feel where the air was wrong. His guys called it the gift. He called it paying attention. He had come into Greer's this afternoon to sell his grandfather's watch. His grandfather, a man named Leroy Marsh, who had driven a bus in Memphis for 31 years and never missed a shift, had left Donavon the watch when he died. It was a Hamilton, 1962, with a cracked crystal and a name engraved on the back, L. Marsh, with gratitude, MTD 1971. It kept time perfectly. Donavon Marsh had been trying to sell it for 3 days. He had called 2 shops. He had looked at it every morning for a week, sitting on the edge of his bed, turning it over in his hands, reading his grandfather's name like maybe it would tell him something useful. His daughter, Brianna, needed $340 for a school trip to Washington, D.C. She was 14. She had worked all semester to earn half of it. Babysitting, helping a neighbor with yard work, selling cookies at the church sale. She had come home with an envelope and counted it out on the kitchen table. $162 and some change. She had looked up at her father with those eyes she had, his mother's eyes, his mother who had been gone 8 years now, and she said, "I'm almost there, Daddy." He told her she was more than halfway. He meant it as encouragement. He lay awake that night, calculating what he had and what he didn't. He still owed $1,100 on his truck. He had a water heater that needed replacing. He had said yes to both things the same week, and now he was here on a Tuesday afternoon, holding his grandfather's watch in a drugstore bag, waiting for a pawn shop owner to tell him how much a man's whole life of service was worth. Now he was looking at a badge on a counter and an old man who was trying not to show what it was costing him to be here. Donavon Marsh had stood in line exactly like this when he was 9 years old. The buy right on Winchester. His mother counting nickels on the belt because she was short for the milk and the bread. The woman behind the counter had made a sound, not a word, just a sound, and his mother had looked up with the expression of someone who had already swallowed the humiliation before it finished landing. Donavon had been standing beside her. He had felt the whole thing in his chest. He never forgot it. "Hold on," he said again. Greer blinked. "Excuse me?" Donavon stepped up to the counter. He set the drugstore bag down and he looked at the badge and then he looked at the old man standing next to it. "That's a service badge," Donavon said. Callum looked at him. Careful, quiet. The way a man who has spent decades reading people looks at someone new, taking the measure before speaking. "Yes, it is. MPD, 23 years. Donavon nodded slowly. He looked back at the badge. There was a long pause that Greer clearly didn't know what to do with. He started to say something about appraised value. "What do you need?" Donavon asked. Callum went still. "I'm not asking to be in your business," Donavon said. "I'm asking because I want to know. This is the moment. Right here. Not the big moments, not the ceremonies, not the commendations, not the mayor at the podium. This is the moment that costs something. An old man standing at a counter with his badge, and a younger man with a drugstore bag, and neither one of them has enough, and one of them just asked the other what he needed." Aubrey Callum looked at Donavon Marsh for a long time. "Medication," Callum said finally. "New prescription. Not covered. I need 412 by Friday." Donavon said, "Okay." Callum shook his head. "I'm not asking. I know you're not." Donavon Marsh opened the drugstore bag. He took out the watch, he set it on the counter next to the badge, and then he looked at Greer and said, "What can you do for this?" Greer picked it up, examined it. "Hamilton, good condition, crack in the crystal, but the movement's clean." He turned it over, read the engraving. 250, maybe 275, 275, Donavon said. "And I need you to apply it toward whatever he's getting for his medication." Greer stared at him. "That's not really how. I know how it works," Donavon said evenly. "I'm asking you to make an exception." There was a silence. Greer looked at the watch and at the badge and at these two men standing in front of him, and something shifted in the room. The kind of shift that happens when a small space suddenly contains more weight than the furniture in it. He said, "I can do cash for the watch. 250. Donavon said 275. Another pause. 260. Done. Callum had not moved. He was watching all of this with the expression of a man who has seen enough of the world to know when something is real and when it is performance, and he was trying to determine which this was. He had been on the force long enough to know that people rarely did things for nothing. He had also been on the force long enough to know that sometimes, not often, not as often as you'd hope, but sometimes they did. "I don't know you," Callum said to Donavon. "No, sir. Why are you doing this?" Donavon picked up the watch and turned it over. He read the back, the engraving, his grandfather's name, and the year. He set it back down. "My grandfather drove an MTD bus for 31 years, Donavon said. He got a watch and a handshake when he retired. He never complained about it. I used to think that was because he didn't notice." He paused. "I got older. I figured out he noticed. He just decided to keep going anyway." He looked at the badge. "You gave 23 years, Donavon said. You don't sell that for grocery money. Not if there's another way." Callum looked at him. "Medication," Callum said. "I said medications. Same thing," Donavon said. "Same dignity." The pharmacy was 3 blocks away. They walked. Neither of them had planned to walk anywhere together, but they were going the same direction, and somehow neither of them suggested otherwise. The afternoon was warm, and the street was loud with traffic, and Donavon was carrying $260 in cash in his jacket pocket, and Aubrey Callum was carrying his badge. He had taken it back. Greer hadn't argued. Callum was quiet for most of the walk. He was not a man who filled silence with words. In his experience, silence was where the truth usually lived, and the people who couldn't sit in it were generally afraid of what it might say. "You short now," Callum said. It wasn't a question. "Some," Donavon said. "For what?" Donavon told him about Brianna, the school trip, the kitchen table, the envelope, the $162, the way she had looked up at him. Callum listened. He did not say anything for a block and a half. "How old?" 14. "Smart." Donavon glanced over. "Yeah, she is. Science mostly. Her teacher says she could do something with it. They all say that." "This teacher means it," Donavon said. "Brianna enters this competition every year. Regional science fair through the school she's placed twice, 3rd grade, 4th grade. Now she's going to DC with the team." Callum nodded. He thought about something. He didn't say what it was. They got to the pharmacy. The woman at the counter, "Name tag," said Patricia, pulled up Callum's prescription and told him the balance, $412. He counted out what he had and what Donavon had given him, and he was still $152 short. He stood at the counter with his hands flat on the surface. That's a familiar feeling, when you've come as far as you can come and the distance is still there. When you've done everything right and something is still out of reach by exactly the amount you don't have. It has a specific weight. It presses down from above and up from below at the same time. "Sir?" The pharmacist was waiting, kind but practical. Callum was about to say he'd come back Friday. Maybe by Friday something would shake loose. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at it. A number he didn't recognize. He let it go. It buzzed again. He picked up. The voice on the other end belonged to a woman named Cecile Okafor. She was a crime reporter for the Memphis Commercial Appeal. She had been trying to reach Aubrey Callum for 3 days. She had gotten his number from a former colleague who had said, with considerable emphasis, "That man is the reason half those cases got closed." She was writing a piece about the city's cold case unit, specifically how a recent conviction in a 15-year-old murder case had come through. The detective's notes, the reanalysis of evidence, the original theory that had been dismissed and then proven right. The conviction had happened 2 months ago, and the family had given an interview and mentioned by name the detective whose work had made it possible. Aubrey Callum. The department had confirmed he was retired. They had not given her his contact. She had found it the long way. "Mr. Callum," she said, "I know this is out of nowhere. I've been trying to reach you about the Delacroix case." Callum stood very still at the pharmacy counter. The Delacroix case. He had worked it in 2009. Nadine Delacroix, 43, found in her car off Shelby Drive. The first detective had ruled it accidental. Callum had disagreed. He had written 6 pages of notes explaining why he disagreed, had submitted them through the proper channels, and had been told, politely, then less politely, to move on to active cases. He had moved on. He had not forgotten. He had kept copies of his notes. When he retired, he had mailed them to the cold case unit with a letter that was 3 sentences long. He had not expected anything to happen. 2 months ago, a man named Weston Pryor had been convicted of 2nd-degree murder in the death of Nadine Delacroix. The evidence that broke the case was the same evidence Callum had flagged in 2009. The theory was the same. Nadine Delacroix's children were grown now. They had sat in that courtroom. They had heard a verdict. "I know about the case," Callum said. "I'd like to write about your role in it," Cecile Okafor said. "Your original analysis. The fact that it was dismissed and then turned out to be right. There's a larger story here about what gets ignored and what gets remembered and who does the work that nobody sees." Callum looked at Donavon Marsh standing a few feet away, not trying to listen but not going anywhere either, just present in the easy way of a man who was not in a hurry and not trying to prove anything. "What kind of piece?" Callum asked. "Front page," she said. "With photographs if you're willing, and I'd like to interview the Delacroix family. They've already agreed. They want you in the room when we do it, if that's something you'd consider." Callum was quiet for long enough that the reporter said, "Mr. Callum, I'm here," he said. "Give me your number. I'll call you back." He hung up and stood there. The pharmacist cleared her throat gently. "Sir, would you like to?" "One moment," Callum said. He turned to Donavon. He looked at him for a second in the particular way that Callum looked at things, measuring, reading, deciding. "You know what the Delacroix case is?" Callum asked. Donavon shook his head. "Woman was killed in 2009. Husband did it. Department said I was wrong. I was right." He said it plainly, the way he said most things. The man who did it is in prison. The family got what they needed. He paused. Took 15 years. Donavon didn't say anything. He understood that the silence was part of the story. "I'm going to call her back," Callum said. "The reporter." He looked at the prescription counter. "But right now, I'm 152 short," he said it without any particular emotion. Just the fact of it. Donavon Marsh reached into his jacket. "No," Callum said firmly. "You already? I know what I already did," Donavon said. "That was the watch. This is something else. You've got a daughter with a school trip. I've got 2 hands and I know how to use them," Donavon said. "Trip doesn't leave for 6 weeks. I'll work it out. You can't just, Mr. Callum." Donavon said his name with a kind of quiet authority that stopped the sentence. In 2009, when Nadine Delacroix's family needed someone to see what really happened, you saw it. You wrote it down. You sent it in even when nobody wanted it. And you did all of that without knowing if it would ever matter. He looked at him steadily. It mattered. 15 years later, but it mattered. He put the money on the counter. Let it matter today, too. Pay attention to the next part, because this is where it gets complicated in the way real things get complicated. Not with a twist, not with drama, but with the slow accumulation of consequence. Callum called Cecile Okafor back that evening. They talked for 40 minutes. He agreed to the interview and to the photographs and to being in the room when the Delacroix family sat down. He told her about the notes, about the 6 pages he had submitted in 2009, about the letter he had sent with the cold case files. She asked if he still had copies. He told her yes. She asked if he'd be willing to share them. He said he would think about it. The piece ran the following Sunday. Front page, above the fold. The headline read, "The Detective Who Wouldn't Let It Go." There was a photograph of Aubrey Callum standing outside the building on Poplar Avenue where he had worked for 23 years. And he was not smiling in it, but he looked like himself. Still, measured, present. The Delacroix family was photographed separately. The oldest daughter, Martine, had been 11 in 2009. She was 26 now. In the interview, she said that for a long time she had believed that what happened to her mother didn't matter to anyone who had the authority to do something about it. She said she had spent years learning to hold that belief alongside a life. She said that when she heard about the conviction, she sat in her car outside her apartment for 40 minutes before she could go inside. "Somebody saw it," she said. "Somebody wrote it down. That's all I needed to know, that somebody saw it." The response to the article was not small. There were letters, there were calls. The police union, after some consideration, issued a statement acknowledging Callum's contributions to the department. The city councilman from his district asked if he would consider speaking at a public safety forum. He said he would think about it. What he did first was call Donavon Marsh. He had gotten the number from the phone book. Donavon had told him he was listed, that very few people under 60 were anymore, but that his grandfather had always been listed and he had never seen a reason to change it. Callum had found him in under 2 minutes. "You see the paper?" Callum asked. "Yes, sir. Your grandfather would have seen the paper too. Man who drove a bus for 31 years and never missed a shift, he would have read the paper every morning." "Every morning," Donavon said. "Obituaries first. He said you had to know who was gone before you could understand what the day meant." Callum made a sound that was close to a laugh. "That's good." There was a pause. "I spoke with the principal at Whitehaven High," Callum said, after the piece ran. "She reached out, wanted to say something about the district connection, PR of it. I told her I didn't need that, but that I knew a girl at another school who had placed in the science fair twice and was going to DC with her team." Donavon went quiet. "She put me in contact with someone at the district foundation," Callum said. "There's a fund for academic travel. She said she'd make sure Brianna's application went to the right desk." The silence on the other end was the kind that holds something it hasn't found words for yet. "Mr. Callum, I'm not telling you it's settled," Callum said. "I'm telling you I made a phone call. It might amount to something. It might not." "Why?" Donavon asked. Callum thought about the pawn shop counter, the badge on the glass, Greer squinting at it like it was something he hadn't decided on yet. He thought about a woman named Nadine Delacroix and 6 pages of notes that had sat in a box for 15 years and found their way to the right place eventually. "Because you handed me $260 for a watch your grandfather left you," Callum said. "And you didn't do it so I'd owe you something. You did it because you saw a man at a counter and you decided He didn't have to stand there alone. He paused. I decided the same thing. There is a school in Memphis where a girl named Donavon Marsh won her third regional science placement this year. She is 14 years old, and she has her mother's eyes and her father's patience and her great-great-grandfather's belief that showing up matters, that you do the work, even when the work doesn't announce itself, even when nobody is watching, even when the only record of it is a 6-page report that sits in a box for 15 years and still eventually finds its way to the truth. She went to Washington, D.C. in March. She stood in the Natural History Museum and looked at a fossil of something that had lived 200 million years before anyone was there to see it, and she thought about what it means to leave evidence of yourself in a world that isn't always looking. She didn't know then. She found out later from her father that a man named Aubrey Callum had made a phone call on her behalf. She didn't know that the phone call had come from a front-page story in the Commercial Appeal. She didn't know that the story had come from 15 years of notes that nobody wanted and a conviction that finally closed a family's wound. She didn't know that the chain of it, the whole long invisible chain of it, had started in a pawn shop on Decatur Street on a Tuesday afternoon, with a badge on a glass counter and her father saying, "Hold on." She knows now. She asked her father once after he told her why he stopped, why he didn't just let it go, why, when he was already short and already trying to work out a water heater and a truck payment, he had stopped for a man he didn't know and put his grandfather's watch on the counter for a stranger's prescription. Donavon Marsh thought about it. He thought about the buy-right on Winchester and his mother and the woman behind the counter, and what it had felt like to be 9 years old and standing next to someone you loved while they swallowed something they shouldn't have had to swallow. "I've stood in line next to people counting coins," he said, "a lot of times. When you've been there yourself, you know the look." He looked at her. "Don't look away from that look," he said. "Whatever you do in your life, and I think you're going to do a lot, don't look away from it." Donavon Marsh is 14 years old. She has placed in 3 science fairs. She is going to do a lot. She doesn't look away.